Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Data Insights with Gaurav. This video is part of the YouTube series Pandas for Data Analysis. In this video, we'll continue working with columns. In the earlier videos, we have talked about loading the data. Then we talked about data cleaning, where we worked with columns. In the next part, we continued working with the columns. And in the last video, we talked about how to use .loc property or accessor for working with pandas data frame columns, right? So if you haven't seen this video, I encourage you to go and watch the video, right, to get better understanding of what are we doing next, right? Let's continue with our demo. So in this video, we will talk about how to update an existing column in the data frame and how to drop or remove the existing columns, right? So when we are updating column names, we will update a specific column, a single column unconditionally. Then we'll update multiple columns unconditionally. Then we will update a specific column value based on a certain condition. Then we'll update multiple values, multiple columns again based on conditions, right? And then we'll try to drop the columns, a single column, multiple column, and then we'll try to drop some columns based on certain conditions. Like for example, we want to remove a column that has all nulls, right? So that's the topic of this video, right? So let's look at our data set so far. Right, so let me run the data frame, right? So this is what we have right now, right? So we have a data frame which has order ID, product, customer ID, whether he's a prime customer or not, the quantity of the product ordered, the price of each product, quantity, right? So the total price is quantity into price will give me the total price. Then you have the order date, the status of that particular order, the shipping address, month of order, payment method, and total price discounted, whether it's that particular thing is discounted or not, and the category, right? So this is our data frame that we have already loaded, and we have talked about how to load this data set in the earlier videos, right? So let's say if I want to update my payment method right now, the payment method for all the product ordered is credit card, right? So I want to update a specific column unconditionally, which means let's say I want to say that the payment method for all the orders is cash, right? So how to do it? Simple. What we need to do is we should say df payment method column, right, and update it with cash. So this will update a single column unconditionally. So every row will have, instead of credit card, it will have cash now, right? Let's try to run this. You can see that the payment method has been updated to cash. So that is how you update a single column unconditionally, right? Now, let's say I want to update columns unconditional again, but multiple, right? So instead of one column, I want to update multiple columns. So now let's say I want to say that I want to update payment method for all the rows to check. And I also want to say that the membership of all the customers is true, which means is prime is true means that customer is prime customer for me, right? So let's say that's the requirement that I have, that I want to say that all the customers are prime customers and their payment method is check, right? So let's try how to do it. So what you need to do, you have to say df, then pass the column list, and then pass the values that you want to update to, right? So what will happen is now if I go and look at the prime, so everybody is now a prime customer, so everything is true, and the payment method is check, right? So that's how you update multiple columns unconditionally, right? So far so good. Now let's say there's a requirement that came in that I want to update, right? I want to update not all the columns but a few columns, right? So let me restart the kernel. I don't know why this particular thing is looking like that, right? So let me just try to restart the kernel, and it is restarting, right? But still it doesn't look good. Nevertheless, right? Let me run it. So let me run all the keys here, right? So it's still restarting. Okay, now it is done. Okay, now it looks fine, right? So now what do we have? So we have this particular case, right? Now let's say I want to say that only for customer C001, I want to update its payment method to credit, right? Or let's say credit card, right? So now what I want to do is I want to say only for a specific customer, right? Customer C001, I want to update his payment method to credit card. So which means I'm trying to demonstrate updating a single column using certain condition, right? So that is where your .loc property or accessor comes into play, right? So in the earlier video, we discussed that .loc takes in two parameters. One is the row indexer, second is the column indexer, right? So what is row indexer? It helps you filter the rows, right? And what is column indexer? It helps you project the required number of columns, right? So when I do this, what will I get? I'll get from this, right, the output of this, right? So if I just get rid of this, right? If I run this, what will I get? Right? Okay, so just a moment. Why is it not defined? Let me run the entire cell. Right, so now it has run. Now let's try to run it. So now you can see that what does it return? It returns me customer ID 001, right? So this row, right? And it projects which column? The payment method column, right? So which is which column? Which is this column, right? What value does it have? It has check, right? So that is what we have looked yesterday, right? So now what we'll do is we'll try to say equal to the values that I want to update, right? So what will happen is now only for customers ID C001, your payment method will now be updated to credit card, right? For others, it will be still the same. So that is how you update a single column based on a certain condition by use of .loc property or accessor, right? So let's try to run this. So now you can see the payment method is now be updated to credit card, right? Earlier it was check, and that is only for C001 because you've used the row indexer, right? So that's how you update a column, single column based on certain conditions, right? Now, how do I update multiple columns based on certain conditions? Now, let's say the requirement is that for C002 customer, I want to update his payment method to cash and I want to make him a non-prime customer, which means I want to update his is prime column to false, right? So how to do it? Again, we'll need, because we need some certain conditions, right? We want to update some columns, but based on certain conditions, we will still have to look towards .loc accessor, which will help us do that, right? So what does it take? It takes a row indexer. So our row indexer will be for customer ID C002. It takes a column indexer. We want to update which columns? We want to update the payment method column and is prime column, right? So that is what it takes. And the values indexer now will be a list, right? Where we will say, I want to update the payment method to cash and I want to update the is prime column, right, to false, right? So this is how you will update a multiple columns. In my case, payment method and is prime based on a certain condition, which happens to be that the customer ID should be C02, right? And the value being cash and false, right? So let's try to run this. So you can see now, right? For customer ID C02, which is this row, right? The is prime column is false. Earlier it was true, right? And the payment method is cash. Earlier it was check, right? So that's how you update multiple columns, right? Based on certain conditions using the .loc accessor, right? So that's how you update multiple columns. Now, how do you drop columns, right? So let's say how to do it. So what you need to do is that I'm just creating a backup of my data frame so that I can use it later on in the upcoming videos. So I'm just taking a backup here and I'm saying columns to drop. So right now I'm just trying to drop a single column. So I'll say columns to drop as category, right? So I want to drop this category column, right? So how to do it? You have to say data frame dot drop method, right? So what does this drop method take? It takes in the column, right? The column, it could be a list if it is multiple columns, and if it's a single column, it could be a single value, right? So I'm saying columns takes in column to drop, and the second parameter is errors, right? So there could be possible scenarios where the column itself is not present, right? So by default, if you try to drop a column that is not present, right? And if I don't use this, if the column is not present, it will raise an error. Like for example, let's say I'm trying to drop category 1. So now there is no category 1. If I try to do this, you will see that it will raise an error, right? Why? Because you don't have a category 1 column, correct? So it's taking a bit of time, right? So yeah, so now you can see that it says key error, right? And it says that it did not find category 1. Why? Because it did not have that column in place, right? And I'm saying drop category 1, right? So now if I try to include, right, if I try to include the errors clause, which is errors ignore, what will happen is when you raise this, this particular error will not get raised, it will get ignored, right? So now if I try to run this, it will not, it will silently not drop that column because it's not present, but it will also not raise an error, right? So that's the importance of this particular parameter, errors equal to ignore, right? For now, I'm just dropping the existing column, which is category, right? So let's try to drop this column here. So columns to drop is category. Now let's try to run it. So now you can see that earlier I had this category column. Now I don't have it, right? So that's how you drop a single column. How do you drop multiple columns at once? Simple. What you need to do is instead of passing a single value, now you can pass list of column values, right? So in this case, I want to drop total price and discounted columns. So what I'm doing is I'm passing that list to this drop function where I'm saying columns equal to that list of columns to drop. Again, I'm saying errors equal to ignored so that if the columns are not present, it should not raise an error. However, now I do have the columns, so it will not raise an error. Let's try to run this. So now you can see that these two columns are also dropped, right? So that's how you will drop single or multiple columns. Now, there could be scenarios where you would want to, you get the data, right? And the data is not clean. So some columns are blank, right? They contain null values, right? So there could be scenarios like this. So let's try to do that. So what I'm doing is I'm adding a new column called none column. There is no column here null called null column, right? So I'm adding a new column called none column and I'm adding the value none, right? So if I try to run this, what has happened is a new column has got added here, which has all the values none, right? So how to drop such columns, right? So that will be part of your data cleaning process where you would want to drop a few columns that have all nulls, right? It doesn't make any sense of having those columns in your analysis, right? So how to do it? Simple. What you need to do is you need to call the drop NA method, right? So on the data frames, you have a method called drop NA and it takes in axis and how, right? So axis specifies what you want to drop, right? So in this case, I want to drop the columns and how means I want to drop all columns, right? So all means all columns which contains nulls, right? So drop NA method takes in two parameters, axis equal to columns and how equal to all. So what the statement is saying that drop all columns that contain NA in it, right? So in this case, I have only one column that has NA in it, right? So this column will get dropped after this operation. Let's try to run this, right? So you can see here that none column is dropped, right? So that's how you drop columns that contain all nulls, right? So that would be scenarios where you would want to do this, right? So in this video, what we did, we updated of columns, right? We updated unconditionally, we updated conditionally by using the LOC method, right? LOC accessor, and then we use the drop method to drop single, multiple, or based on some condition, right? So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed watching my content, consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that like button. That like button will help me keep motivated to bring such videos, and it'll also help the YouTube algorithm to share it with a wider audience, right? So thank you for watching. See you around. Bye-bye.